Within the boundless infinitude of existence, there lies countless possible worlds. Worlds nearly identical to our own, save for a few slight differences. Worlds tilted so far on their axis that they are almost unrecognizable, and worlds which are strange, bizarre, and wholly beyond your expectations. My name is Matthew, and I shall be your guide as we enter the multiverse of fiction. Please understand that should these tales feel incomplete, it is because the worlds from which they come are still fresh, not yet fully formed. Perhaps we shall revisit these worlds again when they have had more time to grow. But for now, please take them as they are. For tonight's journey, I bring you to a collection of tales which encompass that fascination of humanity with the strange and terrifying. The Maw. It began with the opening of a maw and the utterance of words. From this maw came the sounds that would breathe life into all things. From this maw which existence was born. From this maw that all would come to be. In a place where there was nothing once, a smile formed like a crack in non-existence. And as that crack widened, glistening sharp teeth began to come into being. The crack widened enough for each individual tooth to gleam and glisten like shining white mountains. And then the teeth parted to reveal something even more strange and new to this place where once there was nothing. From the maw poured vibrations that twisted and turned into noise, which sang nothing into something. The noises proliferated, without stop, without end, reaching out in every direction until there was no longer nothing, but rather something. The maw paused, no longer releasing sound, and instead chose to grin at what it had wrought. Behind the gleaming white mountains, something unseen moved, making a new sound, a clicking of sorts. The clicking set off a chain reaction as it touched each existing sound. First came the stars, from the combination of sounds bringing light into the darkness. Next came the planets, born from the stars and the twisting noise. Then came the seas as the ground shifted from solid to liquid. And then the sounds coaxed innumerable things from below the surface. They sang colors into them and plants came to be. Lastly, the sounds touched the minerals of the planets below and the dust from the stars above, and they shaped beings, creatures of all kinds, giant and minuscule, many-legged and few, and they populated the continents. Where once there had been nothing, an empty void which one could call peaceful, now there was something, a great many things, in fact, which seemed to reach out in all possible directions. Instead of the peace which had encompassed the boundless void, there was now the chaos of innumerable beings crying out across the infinite something. The maw grinned once more, those shining, glistening mountains in full view for all of existence to see. The mountains parted, and from within the cavern behind them a new sound came. A scream, and across it all, in a grand cacophony, everything screamed along. The oil. At first, we thought the black liquid was oil, that we'd struck it rich, and that we'd be able to retire and live in leisure. We'd actually started writing down all the ways we'd spend the money. Our first choice was to pay off our debts. And many of us were still rather young, having just finished college not long ago. Student loans pile up high and fast. With this new source of oil, all of us could afford to retire as early as we wanted. From that point, many of us thought about buying fancy cars and mansions, or if not a mansion, at the very least a nice house, and, of course, luxurious items. Joseph really wanted to get rare comic books, Sam wanted the finest booze, and Michelle planned to get only the fanciest food from now on. We were all so wrapped up in what we would do with the money once we sold the oil that we didn't notice the black liquid had begun to move. It bubbled and popped quietly at first, but then it became louder as more bubbles continued to appear and pop rapidly. All of us turned around to look at what was now a rather large puddle of bubbling, popping black liquid. At the center of the puddle, a shape began to form. It started to rise from the puddle slowly. Everyone stood, looking mesmerized. It continued to rise until it was 6 feet tall. The black liquid figure held its form up while the stuff that made it kept running down, a perpetual cycle of oozing downwards and upwards. The figure took on a shape, almost humanoid. The ooze separated in places to give the appearance of arms, legs, and a head. It had no face and no real distinguishing features other than its newly formed limbs. None of us moved. No one made a sound. In fact, I think some of us forgot to breathe. It just stood there, oozed there. Sam moved first. He was sweating. His right eye was twitching and his knees were shaking, but he moved forward towards the thing. It made no reaction. 100 feet, 60 feet, 30 feet closer, and still no signs that it noticed him. 20 feet, 10 feet, 5 feet. He was right on it, his knees ready to give way, but it did not move. It just oozed, showing no sign that it had registered his movement or existence. "What's it smell like?" Joseph blurted out. We all turned to Joseph in horror, and then back to Sam and the thing. More ooze. Sam, despite himself, sniffed it. A puzzled look grew across his face. I don't know. It's not oil. At least, it doesn't smell like oil. I've never smelled anything like this before." We all looked to one another. What was the strange liquid which took on a human shape? It was not oil, but it was certainly something new. Perhaps we could still sell it and make a fortune. The scientific discovery of the decade. There would be news articles, talk shows, and of course, money. We became so enraptured with the possibilities and with our own greed that we ignored Sam. Sam took a quick glance all over the 6-foot-tall, bubbling, oozing humanoid figure. And then he poked it. He did not run like every thought in his head was screaming at him to do. Instead, he pushed his finger into the ooze. The thing cocked its head, and where one would assume a face could be found, some of the ooze separated in a line, which became a pit through which one could view the inky black interior behind bars of black dripping ooze. It was smiling. At first, we thought the black liquid was oil. How wrong we were. The aberrant mind. The memories came disjointed, messy. They are fragmented and missing crucial pieces. There is a large room, a laboratory perhaps. It is decorated with tables stacked high with books, beakers, tubes, and unfamiliar implements. All along the far wall are large glowing tubes. They emanate a faint blue glow, possibly from the liquid inside. Something moves in one of the tubes. A hand, maybe? Or was it a foot? It was some kind of appendage. It brushes up against the glass only for a moment, before disappearing again. The scene changes. A new memory. It is the same laboratory, but different. The tables are overturned, their contents strewn about the floor. The faint blue glow now covers more of the room as the liquid has spilled out of the tubes on the far wall. The tubes are broken, not just broken, but shattered. There are humanoid figures laying crumpled where the tubes once stood tall. They are unmoving. One tube space is completely empty. No glass, no liquid, and no figure. This memory fades to make way for a third. There is a glow. A blue glow which covers everything all around. And there's something beyond the glow. It might be a room. Something beyond the glow moves. Tendrils of varying lengths seem to run across the glow. A hand reaches out to them. My hand? The hand brushes against a surface still covered by a glow, but blocking it from the tendrils. The glow begins to fade from the surface as it starts to dip down from what looks like the top of an enclosure. The room becomes visible. Rows of tables, stacked high with books, beakers, tubes, and unfamiliar implements. The fading glow, a liquid of some sort, has obscured the glass of the tube and several others next to it. There is an audible hiss as the tube now also lowers. The picture flickers, my eyes blinking. Now, nothing separates me from the room. Not the tube, and not the glow. And nothing separates or protects me from the tendrils as they envelop me. The image goes black, and the memory is gone. A shiver runs through my spine as I come out of the dream. I lay wide awake in my bed now. A thick, mucus-like substance coats my body. A reaction to the dream, to the fear I felt. What are these memories? What do they mean? Something changed my body. Something altered me in ways that I have yet to discover. The ones who collected me, did they bring me here to experiment on me as well? Or are they genuinely interested in helping me? Time will tell, I guess. I rise from the bed, or rather I try to, but the mucus substance is sticky, and it takes me some time to peel away from the bed sheets. I'll have to have those burned. My head, I notice, feels as though a vice has been placed around it. Steadily the pain of it increases until it moves from a minor annoyance to a deep, throbbing pain. I stumble to the sink and reach for the medicine they gave me, that they said would help with the pain, with the dreams. Sometimes I wonder if they're just making them worse. I fumble with the container. It's difficult to focus through the ever-increasing pain. It feels as though any moment my skull will split open. and in a way it does. I scream as the pain overwhelms me, and I feel a rush of something, a force of energy leave my body. Glass shatters. The pain dissipates. After a moment, I pick myself up from the ground. I hadn't realized I had fallen to my knees. The mirror hanging over the sink is shattered. Shards of glass are scattered all over the floor. I'll have to clean this up in the morning. No telling how many pieces there are. I pause to look at my many reflections on the ground. The light in the room may be dim, but I can see that mucus coating my bare skin again. But that is not what disturbs me. No, I look into the eyes of my reflections, eyes I know should be a chestnut brown, but are instead an ebony black. Am I even human anymore? The radio. The old RCA radio bar stood tall in the living room of Margaret Stessman. It had been many years since the radio had last been turned on, but the fold-out bar saw frequent use in her small apartment. Margaret enjoyed throwing parties for her friends, on birthdays, holidays, special occasions, and sometimes on days just for the heck of it. Today was one such day. It had been a long week at the office, and Margaret was feeling social. Not so social as to go out on the town, but social enough to want to spend time with her closest friends. She had sent out a message to the party group and had gotten positive responses from almost everyone. Max and June were working third shift at the hospital on Friday, so they were out. She was not upset. 5 people was more than enough for Margaret in her little place. She had restocked the bar on Thursday, so after she got off, all that was left to do was get cleaned up and get ready for the party. In her usual fashion, Margaret was ready a good half hour before anyone else was scheduled to arrive. A good party host always leaves themselves enough time to make last-minute adjustments. She ran a duster across the surface of every piece of furniture in the living room, giving special attention to the radio. The old RCA radio bar has been in her family for decades, as far back as the 1930s. Her great-grandfather had been some important businessman or some such. He had used it to keep guests and business partners entertained in his office, and so it had been with every member of her family since. Even if she only ever used the cocktail bar, Margaret always made sure that the whole radio looked like new. So, it was a shock when the center knob popped off. Never, not once in all its nearly 90 years, had the radio been damaged. Not by hapless mover, nor rambunctious child, nor intoxicated party guest. It had withstood the test of time only for it to start falling apart because of a little light cleaning. Margaret hastily snatched up the knob and attempted to put it back. She would not be the Stessman who broke this family heirloom. Without much trouble, the knob seemed to slide back into place. To make sure it stayed, she twisted the knob to the right, intending to tighten it. Instead, she turned it on. The radio, which had laid dormant for decades, sprung to life, though no music or voices came from it. Just a constant, static sound. Margaret twisted the knob to the left and the static ceased. The radio was asleep once more. She wiped the sweat which had beaded across her brow. Nothing to worry about. It's fine. Can't even see a scratch. Margaret unfolded the cocktail bar and went about the rest of her preparations for the night. An hour and a half into the party, and everyone was well into their drinks. Sounds of laughter and good times filled Margaret's little apartment. It was a good night. They were all sat around Margaret's living room, playing a rather vicious game of Monopoly, when over these shouts and accusations, Jordan spoke up. "Hey, what's that sound?" "Oh, no you don't, Jordan," Heather shouted. "You can't avoid the inevitable by delaying your role." "No, I hear it too," Leslie said. Everyone paused to listen. From behind them came the distinctive crackle of radio static. Ksh. "Is that your radio?" Rachel asked. "I don't think we've ever heard it turned on before," said Thomas. Margaret frowned. She got up and walked over to the radio. The knob was turned slightly to the right. Margaret frowned again. She knew she had turned it to the left earlier. How'd it tilted back to the right? No one had touched it, of that she was certain. She turned the knob to the left, and the static ceased. Margaret stared at the radio for a moment, before returning to the game. Everyone soon forgot about the radio as dice clattered once more, and players had to declare bankruptcy. Over the next few weeks, the radio would turn on at random intervals throughout the day. Sometimes Margaret would come home to the sound of static filling up her apartment. Sometimes it would wake her up in the middle of the night. It became so frequent that in a fit of desperation, Margaret pulled out the knob and stuck a lump of glue in the socket. She jammed the knob back in, tilted to the left. A part of her felt guilty damaging a precious family heirloom, but if that was the price for peace and quiet, she would happily do it again. The static followed her. At first it was just her phone. The static replaced her alarms, her music, and pervaded her phone calls. When she started leaving the phone behind, the static followed her still. It played through the speakers in her car and the headphones connected to her work computer. It followed her across the city, playing from televisions, phones, and any other device she came across. A constant ksh filled her every waking moment. Margaret could take it no more. She tore the knob out of its socket and threw the component across the living room, but the static still came. "What do you want from me?" she screamed at the radio. And something within the radio responded, "Margaret." Margaret stared at the old RCA radio bar that had been in her family for almost a century. The same radio bar which up until a month ago she had never heard a sound from. And now it said her name. "Margaret, I hunger." The static noise grew louder and louder until it was all that Margaret could hear. From within the speaker of the radio, a clawed black and white static hand emerged, reaching for Margaret. She opened her mouth to scream, but all that came out was that same sound. Another hand emerged from the speaker. Together, the two clawed appendages grabbed the carpet and pulled forward. From out of the radio emerged the head and body of a static being. It crawled to Margaret, who could not bring herself to move. It stood now upon legs of static. It was too tall for the ceiling, so it bent over her, the width of its torso larger than her whole body. It had no distinctive features except for the clawed hands. The body was humanoid. The head had no face, no mouth, but it spoke all the same. I hunger. Margaret Stessman could not scream, could not run, could only close her eyes and pray that it was quick. But instead of the black void granted by the veil of her eyelids, Margaret's vision was occupied by a grainy black and white picture. And all she could hear was static. The ritual. Blood trickled down from his now useless left arm. Still red. Still that deep, beautiful crimson, and not the obsidian black gunk which poured out from his companion's wounds. Still a chance, ever a chance to turn things around. He clutched the book in his good hand, the troublesome tome which had brought about this whole mess. No, that was our own hubris, not the book itself. But careful planning, slow work with close attention to detail, that would undo, no, it would fix. No, this was not a thing to be fixed or undone, but a mess to be cleaned up. Recovery first. Then the work begins in earnest. He turned to face the door which would lead out of the circular chamber and up a spiraling staircase. He thought fondly of his room, located in one of the middle floors of the tower, and these thoughts of warm and comfortable respite kept him from noticing a simple fact. The door was locked. Not from within the chamber, as was its design, nor from the other side by some trick. No, the door was well and truly locked by a seal, which only now was he beginning to see. Lines of magic, invisible to the naked eye, streaked across the door. It was not unusual to see such lines within this chamber, or even within the tower itself, but these lines were different. Not the many-colored lines of magic a witch or wizard was accustomed to seeing as they practiced their art, but the same obsidian black which flowed out from his companions. They wrapped around the chamber, choking it, cutting it off from the tower and the rest of the world. Around and around the lines poured out, crisscrossing the door, the wall, the ceiling, the floor, up until all but the lone wizard was wrapped within a deep black from which no light could escape. Fear gripped him firmly as he broke into a cold sweat. He ran through every incantation in his mind, every possible spell, but none he knew were strong enough to free him from this horror. None that he could perform on his own. He looked at the bodies of his companions. The life within them was gone, but residual magic, even in small quantities, would still remain. Between all of them it could be enough. The practice was not strictly forbidden, and in most cultures it was quite common for mages to share their magic with others. But to take another's magic without consent was abhorrent, and to take it from a corpse was in some lands an offense worthy of execution. Yet none were there to bear witness to his crime, and he needed to survive. What is one more sin in the name of continued existence? The spell was not an especially complicated one. Even with one arm, it would not prove difficult to perform. The spell came with a risk, though not one that would prove relevant. He set the book down and began the spell. Drawing his good hand across his chest, he unlocked each seal placed upon his own body to prevent the magic within from flooding outwards. The incantation continued as he reached his hand openly towards the bodies. In a fluid motion, he drew the hand back to his chest and watched as multicolored lines of magic pulled up and out from the corpses and flowed into him. He felt a surge of immense magical power within his body. This will do. This will be more than enough. He redid the seals on himself to make sure he got every last drop of magic and turned to face the door. He reached out his hand to make a grasping motion as if he were clutching a doorknob, and he turned to the right. That which binds shall become unbound. That which blocks shall become unlocked. By my power I command, remove this barrier which bars my way. Nothing happened. The lines of obsidian remained, the door stayed locked, and the magic did not flow. What had gone wrong? The spell was correct for the situation. The incantation had been flawless, so why did the magic not do its work? Behind him, he heard the flutter of pages turning rapidly. The book, the leather-bound volume, with interweaving gold and purple designs on its cover, had come open. On its own. And from the pages of the book, an answer to his questions came. When one opened themselves to take the magic of another, they risked their own magic being taken, or a curse being hidden within the lines which flowed to them. Or they risked letting something in. The pages of the book were blank, but the wizard could see something begin to take shape. A toothy grin made its way across the pages. The pages turned and the mouth moved with each flip, mouthing words which he now heard in his head. You sought power beyond your wildest dreams, magic to alter the fabric of this world. Your fellows could not have it, but you shall, as my vessel. The pages stopped turning. Within the lines of obsidian which covered the chamber, the wizard saw movement. Off of every surface, the lines spilled onto him. He felt the seals on his body unlock as the magic within him surged again. He wanted to run, but his feet would not obey him, and the door was still locked. He made to scream, but no sound left his throat. All was silent as the obsidian lines enveloped him. The wizard was gone, and something else stood in his place. The tree. There is a house, you know the one, at the end of the lane atop a hill. It sits apart from the town. None live in it, and few dare to venture up the road to knock on its towering door. The iron fence which once encircled the house and its yard is rusted and lies broken in several places. There were once a great many statues decorating the yard, but most of them have crumbled beyond recognition. The house looks to be falling apart itself. Chipped paint, warped wood, shattered glass, and creeping moss crawls its way up the walls. Everything about the house screams haunted in the minds of children and adults alike. But the house is normal. It had no old witch who cursed the place. No one had died a horrible death in it, and it was not built upon the graves of those who had been wronged and forgotten. There was no magic here. It had simply been left to face the ravages of time alone. No, the house was not something to be feared. The tree, however, that horrid tree, that black as pitch tree, that was something which would worm its way into your dreams and turn them into nightmares. It was a large tree reaching up beyond the 2-story house. Its branches, which never grew leaves, curled upward, ever upward, twisting and contorting in unnatural patterns. At night, one could be forgiven for thinking the branches were in fact a tangle of peculiarly long fingers. It was not dead, for its branches continued to grow over the years, and something did grow on its ends, so they say. Once a year, on All Hallows' Eve, those brave and foolish few would make their way past the fallen barriers and up the creaking steps to stand before the menacing door. Cracking voices dared one another to knock on it, to tempt the imagined monsters they believed to lay beyond the threshold. The door would open, either because someone had worked up the courage to knock, or because the wind had blown at just the right time. On those nights, when the sight and sound of a door seeming to open all on its own did not send children screaming into the night, those brave and foolish few would wander into the house. They would jump at shadows and the creaking noises of a decaying house. They would hear the wind blow through cracks and mistake it for monstrous moans. All these things and more which their imagination brought to life. Inevitably, there would always be one or two too scared to go beyond that threshold. Terror held them tight on those steps, and they would not move forward, no matter the jeers and urgings of their companions. They would remain outside, alone, except for the tree. That horrid tree, that tree as black as pitch, stood with them in the night. Those left behind would not look at the tree, for in their minds they saw the branches like grasping fingers reaching out for those who drew too close. But if they looked at the tree, they would see that their imagination was not exaggerating. The group would eventually leave the house together or in scattered members, screaming into the dark as they made their way home to where it was safe and warm. But if they were to remember those they left at the door and turn back to glance at the house, they would see the tree, horrid, black as pitch, twisting branches, and on the end of one or two, a pumpkin carved with a face they knew.